In September 2018, the city of Mumbai was engulfed in outrage when the case of Daya, a young woman who had endured unimaginable horrors, came to light. Daya had been sold by her husband, Kav, to a feared mafia leader named Kav as a means of settling his gambling debts. For nearly a year, she was held captive, enduring unspeakable abuse as Kav's unwilling partner and servant. When she managed to escape and sought help from the authorities, she was met not with justice but with chilling indifference, as powerful figures within the police and local government had been bought off by Kav's organization. This wasn't just a story of one woman's tragedy, it exposed a massive underworld of crime and corruption that had deep roots within the city's power structure. Journalists determined to reveal the truth conducted undercover investigations, slowly uncovering a sprawling network of illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and human trafficking that operated with shocking impunity. Just when it seemed like justice might finally prevail, Daya was brutally murdered, silencing her voice forever. Her death raised profound questions about the involvement of high-level officials in her murder, leading the public to wonder if the true perpetrators would ever be brought to justice. Daya was born into a modest, hard-working family in a small rural village on the outskirts of Mumbai. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, which meant she bore many responsibilities from a young age. Her family's livelihood depended on their small farm, where Daya labored alongside her parents, helping to sow seeds, harvest crops, and care for her younger siblings. Despite the hardships, Daya grew up with a natural beauty that set her apart. Her kindness and strength earned her the admiration of those around her, but her beauty also caught the eye of many men. Growing up in poverty, Daya's educational opportunities were limited. While she could read and write, her schooling ended early as her family needed her help on the farm. She carried dreams of a better life, perhaps in the city, but her reality offered few options. In her village, marriage was seen as a primary goal for young women, and her parents began searching for a husband for her when she turned 23. They eventually arranged her marriage to Kav, a wealthy businessman from Mumbai. Though Daya had barely met him, she trusted her family's decision and believed that marriage to a man from the city would give her a chance at a stable life. After Daya married Kav, her hopes for a better life in the city seemed within reach. She moved into his large, seemingly comfortable home in Mumbai, leaving behind her rural life. At first, she was filled with a cautious optimism, feeling that her marriage to Kav could bring her family pride and financial stability. However, her optimism soon faded as she uncovered the truth about Kav's lifestyle. Kav had a serious gambling addiction, one he concealed well from Daya during their short courtship. He was a regular at underground casinos, where he would lose staggering amounts of money in a single night. Despite his family wealth, Kav's habits had started to erode his finances. He was also prone to anger, and his temperament often led to explosive arguments. He would disappear for days, leaving Daya alone, only to return intoxicated and in a foul mood. Kav's behavior, which ranged from indifference to hostility, left Daya feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Daya tried to understand and support him, hoping that her patience and dedication might help him change. She offered gentle advice, sometimes asking him to confide in her, but he would brush her off or respond with irritation. In the rare moments when he showed affection, Daya clung to the hope that there was goodness in him, that he might eventually see reason. But instead of the happy, secure life she had dreamed of, Daya found herself trapped in an increasingly toxic marriage. As Kav's debts grew, his desperation turned to recklessness, and his gambling spiraled out of control. Unbeknownst to Daya, her husband's reckless gambling would soon bring her unimaginable suffering. As Kav's debts escalated, he became entangled with a powerful and dangerous figure in Mumbai's underworld, Kav. Kav was not only a notorious mafia boss but also the mastermind behind an underground network of gambling, drug trafficking, and human exploitation. For people like Kav, Kav was the lender of last resort, someone who provided cash with the expectation of ruthless repayment. When Kav couldn't pay his debts, he became desperate to avoid Kav's wrath. One evening, after another fruitless attempt to convince his wealthy friends to lend him money, Kav went to Kav's mansion to negotiate for more time. As he pleaded with Kav, promising to pay back the money, Kav's attention shifted to a photograph of Daya that Kav carried in his wallet. Struck by Daya's beauty, Kav made an unthinkable offer. He would forgive all of Kav's debts if Kav handed over Daya to him. Kav, driven by fear and selfish desperation, agreed to the exchange. That night, Kav returned home, looking shaken but resigned. Daya, unaware of his arrangement, noticed his nervousness and tried to comfort him. The next day, Kav informed her that she was to accompany him to a social event at Kav's mansion. When they arrived, Kav greeted Daya warmly, but something in his gaze made her uncomfortable. Soon after, Cav disappeared, leaving Daya alone with Cav and his associates. It was only then that Daya realized the horror of what Cav had done. Her own husband had sold her, turning her into a bargaining chip to pay off his debts. Her sense of betrayal was indescribable, and in that moment, she knew her life would never be the same. Daya's life in captivity under Cav was nothing short of a nightmare. Taken against her will and betrayed by her husband, she found herself a prisoner in Cav's lavish mansion, a place that appeared luxurious on the outside but held unimaginable horrors within. The mansion was surrounded by high walls, guarded day and night by Cav's men, who ensured Daya had no contact with the outside world. Security cameras were installed everywhere, from the hallways to her private quarters, stripping her of even a semblance of privacy. Raghav was notorious in the criminal world, feared for his ruthlessness, and his treatment of Daya was no exception. At first, he acted as though he was simply protecting her, trying to convince her that she was better off under his care. But this quickly escalated into control and manipulation. Raghav exercised psychological torment, often reminding Daya that she belonged to him now, that no one would come to rescue her because he was too powerful to be challenged. The emotional abuse was compounded by periods of isolation, where he would keep her locked in her room for days, allowing no food or water as punishment for any defiance. Her days blurred into each other, each filled with humiliation and degradation. He would force her to attend parties where she was paraded before his criminal associates as a trophy, an object to be admired but never allowed to speak or assert herself. She was often forced to wear specific clothes, instructed on how to act, and ordered to stay silent at all times. Any attempts to assert herself were met with swift retribution. If she tried to resist, Raghav's henchmen would drag her back to her room, sometimes roughing her up to remind her of her place. Despite everything, Daya clung to her will to survive. She learned to mask her emotions, appearing obedient and submissive, all the while keeping her spirit alive. In her quiet moments, she plotted ways to escape, memorizing the guard shifts and searching for vulnerabilities in the mansion's security. But every escape attempt failed, leaving her physically battered and emotionally drained. As time went on, Raghav's cruelty only grew. He seemed almost delighted by her resilience, finding new ways to try to break her spirit. Yet, despite her suffering, Daya held on to the hope of freedom, vowing that one day she would escape his clutches. After enduring months of captivity, Daya finally found a moment when the guard's attention lapsed. Late one night, during one of Raghav's infamous parties, she managed to slip through a side door and out into the dark streets of Mumbai. Disoriented, terrified, and injured, she wandered through the city, desperately seeking help. After hours of navigating through unfamiliar alleys and dodging suspicious eyes, Daya finally reached a police station, her last hope for rescue and justice. Daya's trauma was evident as she recounted her horrific ordeal to the officers on duty. But instead of the protection she had longed for, she was met with cold indifference. Some officers mocked her, accusing her of exaggeration, while others outright refused to listen. Her despair grew when she realized that they had little intention of pursuing her claims. What Daya didn't know was that Raghav's influence extended far beyond his mansion walls. The police force was heavily corrupted, with many officers on his payroll, willing to ignore or even cover up his crimes for their own benefit. When she tried to take her case to higher-ranking officials, she was repeatedly dismissed, labeled as hysterical, attention-seeking. Some officers suggested that she drop the matter to avoid further trouble, hinting that pursuing it might place her in even greater danger. Daya was left utterly alone, betrayed by the very system that should have protected her. Her pleas were silenced, her escape treated as little more than an inconvenience, and she was forced to return to a life of hiding, hoping that one day someone might believe her story. After enduring so much and still having her cries for help ignored by the authorities, Daya was at a loss for where to turn. In her deepest despair, she encountered Ronit, an investigative journalist known for his bravery in tackling powerful figures and exposing injustice. Ronit was young, driven, and had a reputation for risking his own safety to bring the truth to light. Initially, Daya was hesitant to share her story, still shaken by the trauma she'd endured and fearing further retaliation from Raghav. However, Ronit's genuine empathy and determination to help her gave her a renewed sense of hope. She slowly began opening up, recounting her experiences in harrowing detail. As Ronit listened to Daya's story, he realized he was uncovering something far more sinister and extensive than a case of captivity or domestic abuse. What Daya described pointed to a sprawling criminal network, one that controlled not only the underworld but also held sway over law enforcement, politicians, and influential businessmen. To bring down this empire, Ronit knew he would need concrete evidence. He spent weeks conducting research, tracking down leads, and verifying Daya's story piece by piece. He reviewed financial records, spoke with people who knew Raghav's operations, and even went undercover to expose the inner workings of Raghav's organization. he was astounded by how far-reaching Raghav's influence was. High-ranking officers in the police, municipal authorities, and even prominent business people were all intertwined in this criminal web. Ronit's investigation was a dangerous undertaking. He received anonymous threats warning him to back off. His family was harassed, and he even noticed he was being followed on several occasions. Yet, these obstacles only fueled his determination. Driven by Daya's resilience and his commitment to justice, Ronit gathered a small team of trusted colleagues who shared his vision. Together, they worked in secrecy, piecing together a damning expose that would not only expose Raghav's crimes but also highlight the corruption that enabled him. As he dug deeper, Ronit uncovered key details: financial records showing massive bribes to law enforcement officials, testimonies from former victims too terrified to go on record, and evidence of brutal retribution faced by those who opposed Raghav. One night, he even broke into an abandoned property once used by Raghav's men, where he found hidden documents detailing human trafficking routes and lists of people on Raghav's payroll. Every detail was carefully documented, and when he finally published his findings, the explosive story caught the attention of the entire nation. Ronit's expose turned Daya's story from one of isolated tragedy into a rallying cry for change, one that demanded accountability from those in power. With Ronit's investigation published, the revelation sent shockwaves across the country. The detailed expose painted a chilling portrait of Raghav's criminal network and the depth of corruption that had protected him. The articles became front-page news, sparking outrage and attracting international attention. Major news outlets and social media were ablaze with calls for justice as citizens demanded answers from the authorities who had failed Daya and countless others. Overnight, Daya went from a faceless victim to a powerful symbol of resilience, and her story became a rallying cry for change. Under immense public pressure, the government ordered a full investigation, and the Central Bureau of Investigation (CBI) was brought in to examine the case. The CBI delved into every aspect of Raghav's empire, uncovering a web of illegal activities that stretched across borders and implicated high-ranking officials, politicians, and prominent business leaders. The investigation revealed shocking details: secret offshore accounts, records of enormous bribes paid to police officers, government officials, and members of the judiciary. It turned out that Raghav's influence had reached some of the highest levels of power, allowing him to continue his operations virtually unchecked. The CBI's inquiry uncovered a trove of evidence, including records of Raghav's brutal dealings with rivals and testimonies from other survivors who had previously been too afraid to speak. For the first time, they felt empowered by Daya's courage and Ronit's relentless pursuit of the truth. Witnesses came forward, each one adding to the horrific tapestry of Raghav's empire. Some recounted how they had been coerced into silence through threats to their families. Others revealed that they had been paid off to retract statements or provide false alibis for Raghav. The weight of this collective testimony left no doubt about Raghav's culpability and the complicity of those who had enabled him. The investigation exposed several prominent individuals who had played active roles in protecting Raghav's interests. A list of corrupt officials emerged, detailing those who had helped obstruct previous investigations, destroy evidence, or dismiss complaints from victims like Daya. The findings implicated police officers, bureaucrats, and influential figures who had each, in some way, contributed to creating an untouchable fortress around Raghav. Public anger grew as the full scope of corruption came to light. People took to the streets in massive protests, demanding accountability from the implicated officials and calling for systemic reforms. The movement was unlike anything the country had seen before, with people from all walks of life uniting to demand justice. Vigils were held in Daya's honor, and her story sparked a nationwide conversation on the rights of victims, the abuse of power, and the need for transparency in governance. In response to the overwhelming evidence and public pressure, the courts convened a high-profile trial against Raghav and his associates. The judicial proceedings were closely followed by the media, with each revelation fueling the public's demand for accountability. Raghav and several of his top lieutenants were ultimately convicted on multiple counts, including human trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and bribery. They received long sentences, some facing life imprisonment, and their assets were seized by the government. For Daya, the court's verdict represented a long-awaited victory. After years of silence and suffering, she had finally seen her abuser and his network brought to justice. However, the journey had taken an enormous toll on her, and while she found solace in the court's decision, she struggled to move beyond the trauma of her experiences. Daya's courage and strength had inspired a movement and set a precedent for holding powerful figures accountable, but her personal struggles remained profound. Just as Daya began to hope for a new beginning, her story took another dark turn. Mere months after Raghav's conviction, Daya was found dead under suspicious circumstances in her apartment. The initial investigation labeled her death as a suicide, but her friends, family, and supporters were quick to dispute this finding. They noted numerous inconsistencies, such as bruises that suggested a struggle and other forensic evidence that hinted at foul play. Dai's loved ones believed that she had been silenced by those who still feared exposure or retaliation. Her death cast a shadow over the justice she had fought so hard to achieve. Speculation spread quickly, with some believing that former associates of Raghav or others within his criminal network had orchestrated her death. For them, Dai's silence meant an end to potential revelations about remaining corrupt officials or unfinished business that her testimony might still expose. To these individuals, her life was a lingering threat to the network's stability, even after Raghav's imprisonment. Outrage erupted once more as news of Dai's death spread, reigniting the movement she had started. Public rallies, candlelight vigils, and protests in front of government buildings called for a full investigation. The public demanded answers, unwilling to let Dai's story end in tragedy. Under this mounting pressure, the government ordered a second, more rigorous investigation into her death. Forensic experts were brought in to review the evidence, and soon signs of tampering and inconsistencies in the initial investigation emerged. Officials who had overseen the first inquiry were removed from their positions, and a new team was tasked with uncovering the truth behind Dai's death. The follow-up investigation pointed to a calculated and ruthless act. Evidence suggested that Daya had been killed to prevent further exposure of Raghav's network and to protect those who had not yet been implicated. Several high-ranking officials and business figures, who had remained unscathed in the previous investigation, were now under scrutiny. The probe revealed a conspiracy involving individuals who had paid to have Daya silenced, fearing the repercussions of her continued advocacy and on its ongoing investigative work. The investigation and the high-profile arrests that followed shook the public once again. Several law enforcement officers were implicated in Daya's murder, leading to a massive shakeup within the police force. Public anger reached a boiling point as the nation mourned Daya's loss and demanded far-reaching changes. Her death became a catalyst for reform, prompting the government to establish an independent anti-corruption agency tasked with investigating cases of police misconduct, corruption, and abuse of power. New policies were introduced to protect whistleblowers, and sweeping reforms were implemented within law enforcement and the judiciary to prevent similar injustices. Daya's tragic death solidified her legacy as a martyr for justice, a powerful symbol of courage in the face of unspeakable adversity. In the years that followed, her story became a cornerstone for activism, inspiring legislation aimed at protecting victims of abuse and holding those in power accountable. Schools and organizations across the country held commemorative events in her honor, and her life was immortalized through documentaries, books, and even proposed laws bearing her name. These laws focused on victim rights, enhanced protection for those coming forward with allegations of abuse, and stronger legal safeguards for whistleblowers. For Ronik, Daya's death was a profound loss that propelled him to continue his mission with even greater dedication. Her story became the foundation of his life's work as he committed himself to uncovering the truth for victims like Daya who had been silenced. Over time, Ronik became a prominent figure in investigative journalism, exposing corruption and championing the rights of those unable to seek justice on their own. Every article he wrote, every case he exposed, was done in Daya's memory, a tribute to the courage she had shown and the sacrifices she had made. Daya's life and death left an indelible mark on the nation's conscience. She became an enduring reminder of the cost of corruption, the bravery of survivors, and the resilience of those who stand for truth. Her legacy fueled a lasting movement, reshaping laws, institutions, and the public's resolve to fight for justice. Though her life was tragically cut short, Daya's impact lived on, inspiring countless others to continue her fight, ensuring that her sacrifice would not be in vain. Years after Daya's tragic death, her legacy continued to influence society and ignite a transformation that few had foreseen. While the public initially mourned her as a victim, Daya soon came to be celebrated as a symbol of resilience, a beacon for justice, and a catalyst for reform. The movement sparked by her life and untimely death grew beyond her individual story, becoming a foundational movement for human rights, anti-corruption, and women's safety in the country. This legacy transformed the legal, cultural, and societal landscape in a multitude of ways. As the years passed, the Daya Memorial Act was introduced, a landmark piece of legislation designed to protect victims of violence, strengthen support systems for survivors, and address corruption within law enforcement and the judiciary. This act included sweeping reforms that created faster response systems for reporting abuse, stricter penalties for officials found obstructing justice, and a whistleblower protection clause that shielded those brave enough to come forward with allegations. The law not only honored Dai's memory but also empowered victims across the country, allowing them to seek justice without fear of retaliation. In schools, Dai's story was incorporated into curricula to raise awareness among young people about their rights and the importance of standing up against corruption and abuse. Educational programs based on her life encouraged students to foster a culture of empathy, resilience, and activism. Through workshops and awareness programs, young people learned about the warning signs of exploitation, the importance of mental health, and how to access support networks. This educational shift helped nurture a generation that was more aware and willing to challenge injustices. At the community level, Dai's legacy inspired an expansion of support services for survivors of abuse and trafficking. Shelters, counseling centers, and legal aid organizations were established in her name, creating safe spaces where survivors could rebuild their lives with dignity. Dai's Fund for Survivors, an NGO founded by activists inspired by her story, provided financial and emotional support to victims of abuse. Her story became a source of hope for those who felt voiceless, and the organization worked tirelessly to ensure that no one would have to endure what Dai had faced alone. The ripple effects of Dai's life and the movement she inspired extended to media and journalism as well. Her story inspired a new generation of journalists committed to exposing hidden truths and speaking out against corruption. Awards in investigative journalism were named in her honor, recognizing reporters who took on cases of human rights abuses, trafficking, and systemic corruption. Many journalists looked to Dai's case as a turning point, realizing the power their profession held in demanding accountability and amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Socially, Dai's legacy initiated a profound cultural shift in attitudes toward victimhood and justice. People across the country began to shed the stigma surrounding survivors of abuse, and public opinion shifted toward viewing these individuals with empathy and support. Dai's resilience had shown that survivors are not defined by their trauma but by their strength, courage, and determination. This shift empowered more people to come forward with their stories, gradually breaking the silence that often surrounded abuse. Dai's story also motivated reforms within the police force and judiciary. Specialized training programs were introduced to educate law enforcement officers on handling cases of trafficking, abuse, and corruption sensitively and effectively. The judiciary implemented stricter oversight mechanisms to prevent future miscarriages of justice, while anti-corruption units increased surveillance on high-risk cases. Dai's case was referenced frequently in judicial circles, becoming a reminder of the price society pays when the powerful exploit the vulnerable. Internationally, Dai's life and death served as an inspiration for human rights organizations worldwide. NGOs and advocacy groups around the globe used her story as an emblem of the fight against trafficking and the demand for transparency within government institutions. Conferences, seminars, and forums discussing systemic injustice and victim rights often highlighted Dai's case as a symbol of the broader struggle against these issues. Some of her most poignant quotes were engraved on plaques and displayed in human rights centers, reminding the world of her enduring strength and the moral obligation to protect the vulnerable. In the end, Dai's legacy came to represent a movement that extended far beyond her life. She became a timeless symbol of courage, a young woman whose tragic end inspired hope, resilience, and a deep-seated desire for justice across the country. Her story was immortalized in documentaries, books, and films, each portrayal capturing the essence of her fight and keeping her memory alive for future generations. Dai became more than just a victim, she was a force of change, a reminder of both the fragility of justice and the power of a single voice to change the world. As people continued to rally around Dai's memory, they ensured that her death was not in vain. Dai's story served as a warning to those who abused power and a promise to every survivor that they would not be forgotten. Through her legacy, Dai achieved what she had always wanted: to make a difference, to give hope to those in despair, and to stand as a testament to the indomitable spirit that could not be broken, even by the darkest forces. In Dai's memory, the nation found a new sense of purpose, a commitment to justice, to compassion, and to a future where no voice would ever again be silenced.